It's just a science project.
Silent breed is people!
You know, a doctor friend once said the same thing to me. Frankenstein was his name.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
That sounds like something out of science fiction.
Please explain to me the scientific nature of the whammy.
We live in a spaceship, dear. So?
Yes, science!
Program complete. Enter when ready.
Hello and welcome to Science on Top, the show that looks at the more interesting science news each week. And this is episode 207. Today is Wednesday, the 18th of November 2015. I'm Ed Brown and I'm joined by Penny Dumsday.
Hello.
Lucas Randall.
Hello.
And psychologist at the University of Queensland. Welcome back, Dr. Cassandra Perryman.
Hello.
We've got some cool stories coming up. Volcanoes on Pluto, people voluntarily being injected with hookworms, and the differences between moon rocks and Earth rocks. But firstly, a recent study of 345 women by the University of Essex has concluded that no woman is totally straight. Now, when I first read that, my reaction was, well, that's a ludicrous statement, because it is. Cassandra, can you first tell us what they did here, and then whether this is bad science reporting, or just an incredibly complicated subject that can't be easily broken down?
Or all of the above.
yes, and yes.
Excellent.
Basically, they were measuring physiological responses when women looked at images of women, and they did check to see what the woman's sexual orientation was before beginning, and look to see if that matched eye tracking and physiological response when looking at images of individuals. Now, of course, being in statistics, the first thing I look at is, was the sample size large enough? Were the controls proper? Were even the images normed and things like that? And unfortunately, the research didn't go into a lot of description on the methodology that I would have liked to see.
Alarm bells.
Given that this was published in the realm of social psychology, I have to be careful here because there's some very good social psychology research out there, but then there's a lot of very bad social psychology research out there. And anything that hits the news but doesn't hit my psych journal radar is always a bit of a red flag.
Right.
So I will say, first off, it is a very complex topic. Human sexuality, as we're seeing more and more, is amazingly complex, both in just the social aspect of it, the personality aspect of it, and the pure biological aspect. And something they didn't control for was this cultural aspect of what women are trained to look at and for what reason. And so they interpreted biological responses as attraction, not necessarily curiosity, not necessarily jealousy, not necessarily self-reflection. And so we've got a bit of a problem here.
Right, because we're in a society that is unfortunately still very male-dominated, and so much of the imagery, the marketing, everything we see is geared towards defining women as being sexually attractive. And then, So you're saying a lot of women are probably picking up on these cues as well, and thus
absolutely.
demonstrating some of those signs.
We are as women, and again, I'm generalizing, so I have to be careful when generalizing. We are trained to thoroughly look at other women in a very critical manner. That doesn't necessarily mean attraction. Now, that's not to say, though, that women aren't more fluid in their sexuality, though, than men are for the same cultural reasons. You guys are stuck in some more rigid norms. We have more fluid norms. Mm-hmm. And we really do. When you talk about things like, pornography and same-sex marriage, which is more acceptable? Guy on guy, girl on girl. Come on now.
Yeah, exactly. It's always women on women.
Quiz? I didn't realise we were having a quiz in this.
I'm too nervous to answer now. Self-incrimination.
So again, the question it's what's more normal is pornography or same-sex marriage?
In pornography or in same-sex marriage, which is more acceptable? Is it girl on girl or guy on guy?
Oh, gotcha. Yes. Well, unless we're talking about gay porn. But that has its own category, which is gay porn, whereas girl-on-girl porn is just porn.
It's just
is
porn.
That what you're saying?
Exactly.
It's just porn.
Awesome. Yes, and I make jokes about how, well, it's because boobs look much better than, but anyhow.
That's true.
But the reality of it is because we are a male-dominated society, and therefore, what is going to be more accepted? The thing that male-dominant society wants to see.
But so then, can you ever do a decent objective study about this sort of thing? Because the only way to control for that is to find a matriarchal society, which are few and far between.
Well, there are benchmark tests you can put in. There are other sides to it. You could show the pictures. You could measure the physiological responses, and then turn around and have the participants say what specifically they were looking at, why they were looking at it. Do you find it attractive, or were you something else? And that just, even that's difficult because you get into this kind of leading notion. But there are ways to tap much deeper into it. And I genuinely hope that research like this continues, just because then it destigmatizes, the other ends of sexuality.
Yep.
And that's a massive problem we have right now is just stigmatizing sexuality.
Definitely. Always happy to have research, but I'd much rather it was done well.
And I can't say it's poor research. It's unfortunately about standard for psychology. And psychology is desperately striving to be a science, but it was set up not as a science to begin with. So we have a lot of catching up still to do.
Yeah, and we've talked previously on the show about the replication study, where they redid 100 classic psychological studies and got very different results.
Absolutely. We're dealing with people.
Exactly. But also with the women and sexuality thing, I'm not sure if you might know this, but wasn't there a study done not long ago, a similar one to this, but instead of just showing pictures of women and pictures of men, they also showed things like pictures of monkeys having sex, and women were getting turned on by that as well?
Exactly.
So it's more just that maybe...
Were the monkeys chicks, or were they...
They were bonobos, and bonobos are hot. Come on.
And bonobos are always having sex of some description with someone of any gender or whatever.
Somewhere, anywhere, in groups.
But I guess that goes to sort of the question that I leadingly put in at the start, which is just that human sexuality is incredibly complicated, and there's so many different aspects to it, of biology, of culture, of nature versus nurture, and all that sort of stuff. It's a really difficult thing to study, I guess.
Well, and exactly. There's one major issue that you hint on with that. They were registering as attracted to images of apes having sex. So what does that say? Does that say that the participant was actually attracted to that, or does it say that our measurement of how we're looking at attraction is wrong?
Right. So, it's arousal, really, rather than attraction. We should probably be more clear on that.
Well, and even then, is it arousal, or is it fascination, or is it curiosity, or is it... And that's part of the problem we have when we're looking at emotion, which, it is our outward display of affection, arousal, all of that is an emotion. We haven't gotten down to the core construct, and until you're down to a core construct, how do you accurately measure it? So they're trying to objectively look at something that we haven't even fully defined subjectively.
Yeah. Very cool. So I think we just need to keep this sort of research at arm's length, and just keep it in perspective, that it is not definitive, and that you can't make any blanket statement like no woman is totally straight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially when there are women who will deny that and who feel and identify as totally straight. Because...
Well, exactly. If you have a number line and you chop off the ends of the number line, do you still have a number line? No, but some women are totally straight. Just like some men are totally straight, and some women are totally gay. Just, no blanket statements. We are people. People do weird things just to defy other people.
Yeah. And from that, let's talk about doing some very weird things. Penny, there are 40 brave men and women in Australia who are about to voluntarily have hookworms injected into their bodies, all in the name of science. This is a follow-up study to see if hookworms can alleviate some of the symptoms of celiac disease and allow patients to eat gluten without being sick. This sounds really weird. How does this work?
It sounds really weird, but the previous study was really promising. And what they've found is that when patients had these hookworms introduced into them, so they had larvae put under a bandage and the worms burrowed into the skin and then lived in the intestines, that the people who were celiac, and as most people I would say know now, celiacs can't eat gluten, which is found in wheat and a whole lot of other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
These people could actually eat a bowl of spaghetti without any ill responses or the equivalent amount of gluten.
Wow.
So this seems quite amazing because celiac disease is not just sort of, oh, I'm just going to have gluten-free bread because I think it's better for me. It's a real awful, awful, awful disease. And when people with celiac have even a little bit of gluten, it damages their intestinal system.
Yeah.
So what's going on is we think that the hookworms either are causing an immune response, or the hypothesis with this one is that they're actually secreting a protein that reduces the inflammatory response to gluten. So they're doing something that means that the immune system stops attacking the gluten so much.
Okay.
So who knows what that something is? The reason this research started was because it was just noticed within populations that people who had the disease, the celiac disease, but also a hookworm infestation were less likely to show symptoms.
And that's an incredible correlation to notice in the first place. I mean, how many people with celiac disease contract hookworm infections, and then how many then have their doctors notice that trend? And that seems in itself a pretty remarkable discovery.
Oh, I know. Especially in Australia.
Yeah.
But then I guess across the world, I don't know, maybe there's other places where hookworms are more common, or I'm thinking, children and pets and...
Yeah. I mean, celiac disease affects 1 in every 70 Australians, so that's relatively common. But yeah, we never see hookworms here. It must be sort of, people who have gone to other countries overseas and come back. And
I think what's exciting is apparently the people in the study were really happy to be in the study and have the hookworms. But what they're going to try and do, the researchers are trying to isolate the actual protein so that you don't actually have to have a worm infestation.
That would probably be a better idea.
Yeah.
But, I mean, because presumably hookworms are not beneficial. They're not good for you. People usually get sick and quite nauseous from them, don't they?
And I assume that if you have good health and good care otherwise, that the hookworms aren't too bad, because apparently this species doesn't breed in the human body. So they'll live there, but they're not going to breed and reproduce and get up to dangerous numbers.
Ah, okay. So their goal really would then be to try and be excreted and then...
Yeah, go somewhere else. They last a few years and then they die. So, yeah.
I'm just looking at the CDC website, and it says that a person with a heavy infection of hookworms may experience abdominal pain, diarrhea, loss of appetite, weight loss, fatigue, and anemia. And I'm sort of thinking, which is similar in some ways to what would happen if you've just eaten gluten, if you see
essentially the symptoms of celiac. And presumably this way that they actually control the load of hookworms.
Yeah. Especially, like you say, it doesn't reproduce in there, so what you're injected with is what you've got. So that's very cool. Well, we'll have to follow that, because I'm very interested to see how it works and how successful it is, because obviously this is a follow-up trial, so the first one was promising at least.
My suspicion is, though, and I mean, this is based on not being an expert in the field at all, is that it's going to be more complicated than one protein and, you know,
Sure.
that's just my feeling. But I am really interested because I know a few people with celiac and it's not fun.
No. Definitely one to follow. So, yeah, it's been a few months since the New Horizons made its exciting, historic flyby of Pluto. And now two possible ice volcanoes have been discovered, identified on the surface. They were discussed at the recent annual meeting of the American Astronomical Society's Division for Planetary Sciences. Put that on your business card. Penny, where volcanoes on Earth spew up molten rock, Pluto's ice volcanoes would spew slushies of water ice and nitrogen and ammonia and stuff, yeah?
Yeah. So for someone who did geology, I've not heard of cryovolcanoes before. I guess that's probably because
They don't happen on Earth.
regular listeners will know I'm not ultra interested in what goes on in space.
Unless it involves a little bit of geology or Plutology or whatever this is.
Plutology.
Well, I don't know.
Anyway, what's been observed by New Horizons is these sort of caldera-looking structures. So they're large mountains, several kilometres high, 10 kilometres across, and they seem to have depressions on the top. So if these are cryovolcanoes, yeah, like as I said, instead of molten rock, they would be erupting a really delightful slush of water or nitrogen or ammonia, methane. So,
Yum.
yum. But I mean, what I think is interesting is how on earth are we going to find out more with just pictures? Like, because I think Lucas was saying, 20% of the data is back so far?
Yeah, only something like 20% of the New Horizons data has come back so far. So, there's a lot of... It took a huge amount of photos, and not just photos, there were other sensors on the thing as well, which is still making their way to us. And, of course, it's just going to take some time. It's not like they've got NBN or anything. So it'll get here, but it'll take a while.
But the other thing is, of course...
Sorry, can we just point out for international listeners, that's our national broadband network, which is a figment of everyone's imagination that we'll never see.
That's not true. There are some places that have it, which is high-speed fibre optic connection.
Tasmania.
Yeah.
Gino. Hi, Gino. Hi, on your NBN, you.
The place that every American actually thinks is another country.
Don't worry, so do Australians.
So do Tasmanians.
Getting back to Pluto, that's the other interesting thing is we haven't actually seen this volcano erupt. We're kind of guessing that that's what it is, just based on how it looks and what we've detected from its depth and surrounding topology. But it would be cool. We've seen, obviously, geysers on Enceladus and Ganymede as well, I think, and a few other moons in the outer solar system. But this would be really cool if it is true on Pluto.
Oh, hang on. Sorry, well, just back up. I think we missed something about this Pluto moon story. The names of these things. One of them's called Picard. That's awesome.
I noticed that.
Picard fonts.
I didn't notice that.
You're really mature about it.
I think it's a placeholder name, but I really hope it sticks. It won't. It'll get replaced with some obscure freaking Latin name, but, I hope it sticks.
I think this is now getting to be more official because these are on Sputnik Planum, which I think was Tombaugh Plateau when it was first sort of discovered. That's the sort of the heart-shaped smooth bit.
The heart on the edge. Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
That was unofficially called Tombaugh Plateau after Clive Tombaugh, who discovered Pluto. But, these volcanoes, if they are that, are called Wright Mons and Picard Mons. Again, they are informal names, though, so who knows what it'll end up. It'll be something boring, like the volcano. No. So, speaking of moons, let's come a little closer to home and talk about our moon for a bit. Because scientists at Southwest Research Institute may have solved a long-standing mystery about moon rocks. Specifically, why rocks on the moon have a lot less volatile elements like potassium and sodium and zinc than rocks on Earth. Lucas, if we assume that the moon and the Earth were formed roughly at the same time and from the same material, you'd expect them to be almost identical. But these moon rocks are missing a few volatile elements.
Yeah, well, basically, all of them. So basically, this goes back to the leading theory on how the moon formed, which of course is the impactor theory. We believe that our moon is kind of special because it appears to be in a position and of a size and with an orbital period that would indicate that it formed when something kind of around the size of Mars smacked into an early Earth and it did some damage. It wrecked the joint. It threw a whole lot of material out the windows. It all went into orbit, and it all went kind of crazy. And it formed basically this great, cloud of material that would have been around the Earth. That cloud of material over time would have formed into disks, like you see around Saturn, for example. And those disks would have gradually accreted they would have coalesced into a very early proto-moon. And that proto-moon would have started to clear out its orbit. It would have picked up more and more of the materials as it whipped around the Earth. And it would have grown bigger and bigger and bigger. And, of course, gravity doing what gravity does, it would have just grown to the point that it basically cleared out its path. So the question has long been, why do the moon rocks that were brought back from the Apollo missions, I think it was 15 from memory, that brought a huge trove of moon rocks back. When I say huge, it was like, probably a couple of 100 kilos. And these moon rocks were analysed, and they found that they were missing a lot of the volatiles that, as you mentioned, Ed, that we have commonly in rocks on Earth. And it's not just things as exotic as potassium and zinc. It's things like oxygen and nitrogen. It's stuff that we call volatiles because they basically have low boiling points. They don't, they tend to be gaseous in their form, and they like to bond to stuff. So on Earth, we find that these types of things end up causing, they end up forming compounds, and they like to bond to things, and they get captured into the rocks, and we can sort of analyze them and find them later on. But looking at the Earth, the moon rocks, they're just not there, or in really, really low quantities. So what this new team did is they had a look at some of the old models for moon formation, some of the new models for moon formation, and they basically merged a few of the different models and did some different techniques on it. And they come up with a slightly adjusted or modified model, which kind of explains what might have happened here. And what they found was that if you imagine this early disk of material that was surrounding Earth, it would have been really, really hot because, an impactor like that releases a huge amount of energy. So this really, really hot disk or series of disks that would have been around Earth, the outer part of the disk would have started to cool much, much faster than the inner part of the disk. The outer part of the disk would have been cool enough for these volatiles to condense and form parts of the material which would have been collected by the early proto-moon. But as the moon collected more and more and more of the material, it also started to move away from the Earth. So the outer layers of the moon, if you picture a sphere that's growing progressively larger and larger in size, the outer layers of the moon would have been picking up materials from the inner part of the disk, which at that time was just too hot for the volatiles to condense. By the time that inner part of the disk got cold enough for the volatiles to condense and therefore form the materials that would have ended up on the moon had already started to migrate away from the Earth. It got sufficiently large enough, and there's a whole lot of physics involved in terms of tidal interactions and so forth, that the moon would have ended up to orbit. Its orbit would have increased, and it was too far away from that inner disk for it to pick up those materials that by then had condensed. So the model would suggest that the moon's kind of like parfait. I'm not going to say like onion. It's like parfait, where it's these layers that have grown over and over, on top of each other. But the outer layers are really, really low in these volatiles because by then the moon had moved away from Earth, and the materials that were starting to form the outer layers were still too hot for those materials to have condensed. And then eventually the moon's moved right away. The inner disk has got cold enough for these materials to condense, and they just would have eventually fallen back to Earth because they didn't have enough orbital velocity to leave the Earth orbit. So they just would have fallen back over time.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool.
So Earth kind of sucked all these chemicals out of the moon, if you will.
Well, yeah, out of the moon,
the proto-moon.
Yeah, and really, what it comes down to is just that extra element of heat and the way that the role that plays in the condensing of those materials, and the way that this layered moon would have formed layer upon layer upon layer. That what material was available to it to form layers in the inner disk when it was still there was still too hot for the volatiles to condense. So it just would have missed out. And then by the time it cooled down, the moon had already moved away.
Yeah, I just think it's really awesome to think of this happening over millions and millions of years. Like, this is such a slow process, but when you describe it, I'm thinking, things are spinning around and it's really quick in my head. But just to think of the sort of slow cooling effect and the small changes in temperature that would have been significant over these millions of years, I think the whole thing is just fascinating. And I like the word proto-moon too. That's a
proto-moon. Oh, that was my word. I added that one. It's not my word originally, but I added it to the story.
I'm stealing it. It's my word now. All right, well, I think that's our show. As usual, all the links are on the web at scienceontop.com/207. Please leave us a comment or send us an email, feedback@scienceontop.com. And as always, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. Dr. Cassandra Perryman, great to have you back on again.
Oh, thank you guys very much.
And where's the best place for people to find you on the internets?
I am on the Facebooks now. You can actually search me under Dr. Cassandra Perryman.
Excellent. We'll have a link to that. So that's like your professional alias. Persona.
Yeah, I was going to say, look, go figure. My name is my name. So then I'm just posting different, I'm on a couple of different podcasts, have some public speaking events coming up, and of course still offer statistical tutoring for anybody who needs it.
And of course, thank you for joining me, Lucas and Penny.
Thanks, Ed.
Always a pleasure.
And thank you everyone for listening. We'll be back again next week, putting science on top of the agenda. Join us then.
This is actually a hookworm, and it's estimated that 700 million people have them living in their stomachs.
When you get infected with them, they enter through the skin, and once they're in there, they travel in your blood through your heart to your lungs, and then you actually get a cough and cough them up into your mouth, then swallow them down to your intestine, where they then attach.
Okay, it's not contagious, is it?
Coming up next, Dr. Logan's actually going to infect himself with 50 hookworms to show us all exactly what they do to our bodies.